So we'll give it first of all with you, Rebecca.
Thanks. I don't know, do the people in control of the technical side of this, is this an okay, do I have everything where it's supposed to be? Yeah, okay, good. Well, thank you for inviting me. This has so far been just a totally wonderful day, and I'm sure that tomorrow's going to be wonderful too. And thanks so much to the, oh, this thing's echoing on me. Thanks so much to the conference organizers. And I'm going to try to move at my slides through quite a clip because we really don't have too much time. But I would like to actually start by reading a little introduction that I wrote. I'll only read briefly, and then I'll move into a less formal presentation. My mother gave birth to me at the end of 1969 after a difficult pregnancy during which her graduate student health insurance allowed her only minimal prenatal care. A hippie with degrees in literature, drama, and education, she was an ideal mother for an infant and a preschooler. She nourished my every spark of creativity, delighted in my personality quirks, fed me healthy food, and taught me to read by the age of 2. Firm believers that good parenting did not require a hiatus from life and adventure, my parents became intimately familiar with the playgrounds, zoos, and pony rides of Europe and Northern Africa. However, she was a problematic mother of an older child. She was controlling and fearful when I showed signs of independence and derided my desires to fit in with my peer groups. My parents pulled me out of school repeatedly for months at a time and moved me to a new neighborhood and school almost every year so that they could travel freely without the responsibilities of home ownership. Seeing that I excelled academically despite these disruptions, my mother showed no sensitivity to their effects upon my emotional and social life. Later, once my independence and my failure to accept her vision of life at face value became undeniable, she more or less relinquished responsibility for me, leaving me to support myself from my mid-teens on. Yet she has turned out to be a wonderful mother of an adult child. Once we each settled into an acceptance of our mutual independence, she became a staunch supporter of my choices and a careful and appreciative audience for my accomplishments, as well as a devoted, playful, creative grandmother. The jury is out on what kind of elderly mother she will become once she's become dependent on her children in turn. I'm practicing on this, so let's see here. There we go. Okay. So was my mother a good mother? Aristotle said that a man's happiness can be measured only once he is dead. Happiness and unhappiness reside in his life narrative only taken as a whole. Similarly, good mothering is properly measured by an entire parenting narrative. My mother's narrative is not yet complete, nor will it ever be univocal. Yet we have a tendency to measure motherhood not in extended narratives, but by a set of signal moments that we interpret as emblematic tests and summations of women's mothering abilities. Women's performances during these moments can seem to exhaust the story of mothering. Mothers often internalize these measures and evaluate their own mothering in terms of them, and we've heard a lot about that already today. These defining moments tend to come very early in the mothering narrative. Indeed, some of them come during pregnancy or even before conception. Consider how the phrase reproductive ethics has come to refer almost exclusively to ethical analyses of discrete choices faced during pregnancy or even earlier. Key topics in reproductive ethics include abortion, pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, and fertility medicine. This ought to strike us as strange. Reproduction is the process of creating new people and building families and communities. Reproductive ethics ought to refer to the ethics of creating and caring for new generations. This is a process that surely extends across the lifespan and is not restricted to conception and pregnancy. Yet bioethicists consistently lose interest in mothers once the beginning of their narrative is over. We give little or no attention to the ethics of mothering older children, not to mention adult children. The ethical measure of mothering is squeezed into a few moments during the very beginning of mothering or pre-mothering. This reductive understanding of mothering, I claim, has had counterproductive effects upon healthcare practice and policy, encouraging measures that penalize mothers who don't live up to cultural norms during these signal moments, while failing to encourage extended narratives of healthy mothering. Oops. So what I want to do is look quickly at 3 of these signal moments and then talk about how they function as signal moments and what kind of effect they've had on policy. And the first moment I'd like to talk about is the ultrasound, the routinized ultrasound. Now, of course, many mothers have more than one ultrasound, but at least in North America, almost all mothers have an ultrasound at around 19 weeks, and this has become quite the ritual. It's clear from the literature, both when you go online and see what mothers themselves are saying, and from some of the anthropological work that's been done, that we see good mothers as being the mothers who have a certain attitude towards these ultrasound events. They look forward to the ultrasound, they respond to the ultrasound properly with the right kind of love and amazement, they're supposed to tear up. They're supposed to, interestingly, because you might think this is bad medical advice, they're supposed to understand the ultrasound primarily as a kind of an important social event rather than as a diagnostic event. And interestingly, they're encouraged to treat it as a keepsake moment, right? This is the moment at which they're supposed to meet their baby, and they're supposed to treat it as such. Lisa Mitchell, in a wonderful 2001 book called Baby's First Picture, she did wonderful ethnographic work talking to mothers about their experiences of their ultrasounds and also talking to ultrasound techs. And what she found, and she got to sit in ultrasound after ultrasound after ultrasound and watch what happened, mothers who don't respond properly to their ultrasounds, if they show too little emotion or too much emotion, or if they're concerned with the wrong thing, if they don't seem concerned enough about the fetus's health, or if they're too concerned about the fetus's health, if they're overly concerned with the sex of the baby, and so on. And interestingly, one of my favorites, if they call it a fetus rather than a baby, they get sanctioned quite directly by the ultrasound techs, who will correct them. In the language case, they'll actually correct them. They'll say, oh, we say baby here often, or they'll just relentlessly say baby until the mother gets the idea. But the women who really don't perform properly during their ultrasounds got measurably less by way of explanation of what the ultrasound meant, by way of feedback, by way of being offered the keepsake photo to take home, and so on. So they were punished in fairly direct ways. And Mitchell found that women in her study worried about whether their reaction had been appropriate. So she would interview them after their ultrasound, and they would explain how they had felt and what had happened, and then they would ask her, well, how did I do? Which was an interesting response. Just in case you think I'm being metaphorical about how this is supposed to be a keepsake moment, I've got it wrong every time. This is from a clinic in Atlanta. These have sprouted up all the way across the United States. I haven't seen any yet in Canada, which are commercial ultrasound booths where you can go get an ultrasound framed in a pretty picture. This one is called, the clinic is called Fetal Moments, an Ultrasound to Remember. And they recommend that you purchase this custom keepsake jewelry to enshrine this important moment in your child's development and wear it around your neck forever. And they, in fact, warn you in their promotional literature that if you lose this moment, you'll regret it for the rest of your child's life. Okay, next moment I'd like to talk about is labor and birth itself. I think we've set birth up as an achievement test for mothers in our culture fairly broadly construed, where good mothers are mothers who have complete control over how the birth goes. Ideally, they deliver vaginally with no pain medication, but more importantly, they have a plan, they're in command of that plan, and they treat the birth as an event that they have engineered and that is going to maximize both their mothering, their bond with their baby, their child's future chances, and also maximize their performance of their own maternality. Bad mothers either make other choices, they choose C-sections, or they choose pain medication, or even worse, they just simply aren't strong or disciplined enough to control the birth situation. I'm not going to read you all of my quotations. I presume you're reading them for yourself as we go along, but just to read you the second one. This is from a discussion board. I'm totally against elective C-sections. A smart woman who loves her unborn child will avoid having a C-section if at all possible. Only a self-absorbed wimp would choose to put her baby in harm's way so that she doesn't have to alter her schedule or feel any pain. what's fascinating to me about quotations like this, and there's tons of them, first of all, is the elision between what happens during the few hours or a couple days of birth and the love for the unborn child, right? There's this spreading out so that this symbolizes the entirety of her relationship to her child. And also you'll notice that in these quotations, like in all of these quotations, there's a lot of talk about how could you put your baby at risk, but there's no specific risks cited. Right? It's just this vague notion that if the birth doesn't go properly, you're risking your baby's health. Of course, they'd be hard-pressed to cite real risks because, in fact, both C-sections and vaginal births in our society are extremely safe, and both of them come along with various risks that may or may not be shared with the other, but coming up with some kind of total about which one is riskier is a fool's game at this time in history. So it's not about specific risks. It's about performing the proper maternality during this special moment. Similarly, good mothers make elaborate personal birth plans, and they have the strength and the discipline necessary to carry out these plans. This started, I'm not sure exactly when it started, maybe somebody else does, but it's been, the birth plans, I don't know how recently people in the audience have had their babies, but the elaborateness of the birth plans has been escalating at an amazing clip. So just to show you, you can download the birth plan, of course, online, fill it out, and bring it to your provider. Let's hope this works. Yes. So this is a birth plan to fill out, just to show you some of the things that you're supposed to be deciding about. Oops, I want bigger. Where did it go? Too big? Where's the actual thing? There it is. Now we'll go up to, oh, there. Okay, sorry. So you don't have to answer all of the questions. It tells you generously. But here are some of the things that you're supposed to control. Okay, so we've got first stage of labor. Here's the lights. Whose clothes? Who do you want in there? How many exams? What kind of mobility do you want or not? Here's the hydration section. Ice chips, yes, no. Jello, yes, no. Which kinds of fetal monitoring do you want or not want? Pain relief, of course. Relaxation, positioning, medication, epidural. I'll just scan through these because there's too many. There's the various kinds of epidural. Do you want nipple stimulation? Do you want your waters broken if they're not going to break on their own? Second stage, pushing, foot pedals. Do you want the squat, the birth bar, and so on? It's 7 pages long. So we're expected to orchestrate these our births, and I'll read you just the first quotation because it blows my mind. It says, "In the happy haze of early pregnancy, the reality of labor and birth may seem extremely far off, which makes this the perfect time to start planning for the arrival of your baby with a birth plan that details your wishes." Which strikes me as saying, the second half strikes me as saying almost the exact opposite of what the first half says here. A lot of people have pointed out to me that the births are starting to have some of the social logic of weddings, right? I mean, it's your special day, and you're supposed to be in command of it, and it's supposed to be emblematic of the relationship that's going to go on from that point on. So mothers who do not manage to stick to their birth plans describe feelings of failure, grief, lack of confidence in their mothering abilities. A lot of them worry about having missed out on some supposed magic first hour of proper bonding and breastfeeding. Their relationship to their child is going to be sullied forever now. And what I'd like to claim, just to wrap up this section of the paper, is that we need to work to remember that mothering cannot possibly be defined by its first moment. Right? Even the best bond, the perfect orchestrated bond between a mother and a 2-minute-old has very little to do with the actual mother-child bond that's going to develop over the next however many years. You can try to take this as a symbol of your maternal love, but maternal love is not about what goes on between a mother and her 2-minute-old, in my view. What we see here throughout this birth rhetoric is an emphasis on making the correct choices and having control over birth. And I would claim this isn't, again, about having control over real risks. It's rather part of this larger ideology that measures mothering in terms of these personal choices that are supposed to be the right choices and control choices made at signal moments. Because, as I pointed out, all of our standard choices these days about how and where to deliver are very safe. and the risks are hard to compare. So we're not talking here about minimizing risk. We're talking about the symbolism of managing to perform the proper self-sacrificing acts and perform maternality at the right moment. Okay, third, you are what your child eats. As we've heard a lot about at this conference already, providing early nutrition and enabling long-term healthy eating patterns are obviously hugely important parts of good mothering, but unfortunately our culture is replete with these images of feeding moments that supposedly corrupt both children and mothers forever. And if you look through major parenting guides, such as What to Expect When You're Expecting and the La Leche League guide, what you'll see is a lot of rhetoric that suggests that one single suck on an artificial nipple might destroy breastfeeding possibilities forever, right? And women are threatened with nipple confusion. La Leche League says, does one bottle of formula make that much difference? We wish we could say it doesn't, but we can't. It turns out that there isn't really any evidence scientifically for nipple confusion. The best data shows, we don't have great data, but the best data shows that there's really no difference in breastfeeding success among infants who have one bottle a day and infants who don't, starting very early on, starting at 1 week after birth. I believe that we treat single events of allowing your child to suck on an artificial nipple as infecting mothering as a whole. These are long quotations, so again, I won't read all of them, but I'm going to read the first one, both because it's from What to Expect When You're Expecting, which has such incredible hegemony over the maternal imagination now that it needs to be critiqued at every moment, and because it's such an amazing quote. It says, the well-meaning mother who offers her baby a pacifier, and I didn't make this clear from how I typed it up, but the point is offering it once, right? If you cave one time and offer your baby a pacifier, she may soon find herself popping in a pacifier the moment he becomes fussy. She may use it to get the baby off to sleep instead of reading him a story, to ensure quiet when she's on the phone instead of picking him up and consoling him while she's chatting, to buy his silence while she's picking out a new pair of shoes. And then importantly for my purposes, notice, each time you consider plugging it in, ask yourself whether it's the pacifier or you the baby needs. So again, here we see the logic of each time is a test, right? If you do it wrong once, each time needs to be monitored, because if you do it wrong once, that is the signal moment that will escalate into this entire narrative of bad mothering, and I might add, very gendered mothering, right? The things that she needs her space from her baby for are buying shoes and chatting on the phone, not preparing a major presentation or anything like that. And this is, a lot of you I know have read my stuff on breastfeeding. I'm getting more and more interested as my son gets older in the logic of feeding older children, and that's actually what I've been starting to think about more now. But we definitely extend this logic of the single corrupting bite into childhood. It's not just about breastfeeding. So a very recent article in the New York Times says, the current nutritional wisdom says that what children eat may set their tastes in place permanently. In this view, a hot dog is never just a single tube of meat, because it will lead to thousands of salty, processed, who knows what filled lunches to come. Right? So again, that is that very same logic of the single case is never just one case. The single case is what is emblematic for and will lead to an entire mothering narrative. In general, I know it's getting tight on time, isn't it? I'll go fast. So in general, we emphasize making the right choice with each bite or suck, where each wrong choice is treated as, in and of itself, that one episode is treated as a substantial risk for which mothers are held accountable and for which mothers are blameworthy. So, whoops, did I not click? Click. So again, from What to Expect, every bite counts. Before you close your mouth on a forkful of food, consider, is this the best bite I can give my baby? If it will benefit your baby, chew away. If it will only benefit your sweet tooth or appease your appetite, put your fork down. I've actually given a long analysis of this passage. It's a very rich passage for teasing apart. I'm not going to do it here because we don't have time. For now, I just want you to focus on the every bite counts logic again, right? At each moment that you put something in your mouth, that act counts as a self-contained test and in itself is loaded with risk and the possibility for doing it right or wrong. Similarly, as you guys know, and as we've heard a lot about today, we emphasize, rather than emphasizing the message that the more breast milk you can get to your baby, the better, breast milk is healthy, they should have a lot of it, we emphasize exclusive breastfeeding, right? Where every lapse in exclusive breastfeeding is treated as in itself an irresponsible personal choice leading to major risk. And even though I don't have very many minutes, I do want to take 30 seconds of what's left to me to show you an ad from a breastfeeding campaign. Many of you have probably seen this, but I don't know how widespread it was in England. I don't know if it made it via the internet to England. This was the American major breastfeeding initiative that was started in 2004. It went from 2004 to 2006, and it was a whole series of advertisements around the theme, babies were born to be breastfed. And this is just one advertisement, one 30-second spot from that. Let's see if I can do this right.
Studies show babies who are breastfed are less likely to develop ear infections, respiratory illnesses, and diarrhea. Babies were born to be breastfed.
So this advertising campaign was heavily criticized right away by various people, including me, for all kinds of things that we won't talk about now. Do I really only have 1 minute? I was told 25, not 20 originally. I have to get to my policy conclusions. I'll go very quickly. I won't take more than a couple more. The ads have been criticized for alarmism. They've been criticized, in this case, for the offensive portrayal of a black woman apparently in a bar servicing her own pleasure as an analogy. You know, why is this the only black woman in the campaign? Why is this an analogy with formula feeding? But the one thing I want to focus on specifically here is on the use of this episode of a single horrifically risky, self-indulgent, bad choice as an analogy for not breastfeeding in general, right? And with the emphasis on exclusive breastfeeding. So each time you break exclusive breastfeeding, you're like the woman in the bar. Okay. These three moments that I've looked at, and I suspect most of the others that you could dig up, are clearly marked by economic status and by culture, right? So for instance, Mitchell in those same studies of the ultrasounds found that immigrant women, recent immigrants, were much less likely to follow the proper script. They found the expectations and the point of the event very confusing, and so they were more often the ones who ended up getting sanctioned by the ultrasound techs and treated as though they were not displaying proper motherhood. In the case of birth, your chances for having an unmedicated vaginal birth and being in full control of the narrative, I mean, nobody's ever in full control of the narrative, but your chances to control that narrative of birth depend in all kinds of ways upon your prior health status, upon access to good quality health care and a good support system. And you need to be able to marshal all kinds of education and social authority and confidence in order to insist upon doctors respecting these elaborate birth plans. And finally, in the case of infant and child feeding, of course, poor women have lower breastfeeding rates. They have less time and money to provide nutritionally perfect food on every single occasion. And so our temptation to measure mothering in terms of these moments along the way reinforces race and class privilege. So I'll just very quickly conclude with a couple comments about policy. These tests, I think, are part of a larger tendency that we have culturally to focus on personal responsibility and on people's willpower at discrete moments rather than on structural conditions such as environment, lifestyle support, economic background conditions. So what this encourages is policies and initiatives that focus on controlling these narrow moments of choice rather than on supporting extended mothering narratives. We've already talked about breastfeeding, so I won't, but I'll just end by giving you one more lovely example. which is the case of drinking during pregnancy. When you look at the various initiatives that are out there that are supposedly designed to prevent or lessen fetal alcohol syndrome, what we focus on is the completely scientifically unsupported idea that even one drink can damage a fetus, instead of focusing on establishing healthy drinking patterns, on substance abuse support, or on helpful information for women who have drunk a little bit during pregnancy. Basically, if you violate the don't drink even once rule during pregnancy, you find yourself in a state where nobody can give you anything resembling decent information or advice about where to go from there. So once you fail that test, we have nothing available to you. In fact, it turns out, epidemiologically, that poverty and social stress and smoking are vastly bigger risk factors for fetal alcohol syndrome than drinking is. Drinking is a necessary condition, but it's a tiny little condition compared to these other things. And yet you get articles like this. Again, one drink can last a lifetime. Just to point out one final time really vividly, this idea that the one moment defines the whole, contrary to every scrap of evidence that we have. So my conclusion, which I won't go through, I'll just say, is that we need to view mothering as a lifelong process where single moments virtually never determine the whole. And we need to shift our policy and our clinical attention to systematic support that enables mothers to engage in long-term, overall healthy narratives of good mothering, good economic conditions, cleaner environment, and so on, rather than on trying to get them to perform correctly during these signal moments. And I would claim that that emphasis on long-term, healthy reproductive and mothering narratives, that is reproductive ethics. And I will end with that.
Right, thanks very
Thank
much,
you.
Rebecca. That was great.